Example 4 here tells us to match the expression with one of the following. So they weren't quite as nice. They did not give me that it's equal to an exact one. I know it's one or the other up there. It's either A or it's B. And so let's go through and let's just work this problem and see what we get. So let's just simplify it. So we know when we get one of those two answers, we are done. All right. So notice we're adding fractions here. And so we're going to find that common denominator. And so we're going to multiply by the other one's denominator. So I'm going to multiply this one, the first fraction's denominator, by secant of x plus 1. And what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. I'm going to multiply the second fraction here by the first one's denominator, so secant of x minus 1. And what we do to the bottom, we got to do to the top. Excuse me. And so in the numerator here, I'm going to distribute that 1. So I have secant of x plus 1. And then here I'm going to distribute this 1. So plus secant of x minus 1 all over secant of x minus 1 times secant of x plus 1, the common denominator. All right, so let's see. What can we do in the numerator here? Well, we can combine like terms. And so we have secant plus secant is 2 secant. And 1 minus 1 cancels. In the denominator, we can do FOIL. So secant times secant. Secant squared of x. Secant times 1 is secant of x. Negative 1 times secant is negative secant of x. And negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1. Alright, so I'm going to put some equal signs here to help organize it a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to leave my numerator the same here. I can't do anything. But I can combine like terms in the denominator. And so when I do that, I get secant squared of x minus 1, because those cancel. Guys, start looking for things like this. If you notice these are the same parts with different signs in the middle, that came from a difference of squares, okay? So you don't have to write the whole thing out every time. So just watch for that. All right, so let's see. Looking at my answer choices, I'm leaning towards A because it has a 2 in it. All right? And I don't see how I'm going to make everything else become a 1 over secant. So I'm thinking 2 might be a good choice. A might be a good choice, but we still have to prove it. So let's just keep going here. So I'm going to bring this over here. All right, so what can I do? Well, looking in the denominator, I see a trig function squared and a 1. So what is secant squared of x minus 1? So I'm going to rewrite my numerator here. And that came from those Pythagorean identities. Secant squared of x minus 1 is tangent squared of x. Now, how am I going to get to the other side here? Well, let's see. What do we know about... Remember, if all else fails, change everything to sine and cosine. Okay, so let's try that. So I have 2 times secant is 1 over cosine over tangent squared is sine squared over cosine squared. Well, I can either multiply by my little denominators, or I can do keep it, change it, flip it. It doesn't matter. I like to multiply by my little denominators. So I have a cosine squared and I have a cosine. The cosine squared is bigger, so I'm just going to multiply by it. So I'm going to do that in the denominator. That cancels. And so in the numerator, that cosine and one of these will cancel. So I'm left with, in the numerator, 2 cosine of x over... In the denominator, I just have sine squared of x. Well, what do we know about sine squared? Look at what we need, though. We said we're leaning towards answer choice A. All right, we need that 2. We've got it. How could I get a cotangent? What do we know about cotangent? Well, cotangent is just cosine over sine. So what if I take that sine squared? Because squared means it's there how many times? It's there twice. So what if I take and rewrite this as 2 cosine over sine times sine? Well, let's see. I've got my 2. Cosine over sine. And then I've just got the sine of x on bottom, so we know there has to be a 1 there. So let's separate it. So we've got 2 times cosine over sine times 1 over sine. What is cosine over sine? Cotangent. What do we know about 1 over sine? That's cosecant. And look, that is answer choice A. So there's our solution.